In this tutorial, I'll show you how to use Unity's UI and make buttons you can interact with. Back in Unity, first thing we're going to do is right-click the hierarchy and find the UI section. As you can see, there's a lot of different options, but the main ones I use are text, image, and button. You should play around with these other ones just to see how they work. But for now, for this example, I'm just going to start off with text. So when you select it, three things get created. We have the event system, which is how Unity handles input systems, but we don't exactly need this for VRChat, so I'm just gonna ignore it for now. The next thing that was created is the canvas. You can have multiple canvases in your world, but all the UI elements need to be underneath at least one of the canvases. So as you can see with the canvas, it actually has something called a rect transform and not the standard transform. This is basically just saying it's in 2D versus 3D, even though it is still in 3D space. So as this label here says, you can't change any of the values because currently the mode is in screen space. You should change this to world space so that we can change these values. But as you can see here, the thing is huge because, well, the number of pixels is 200 and by 600 here, but each pixel is size 1, meaning each pixel is 1 unit tall. So let's change the size of this. I'm going to set the width here to 1000 and the height to 1000. I'm also going to set the position to 0. We'll find out for a reason, 0.5, 0.0. And then since it's still pretty large, I'm just going to make this 1 divided by 1000, so it is exactly 1 meter wide. There we go. So for these other options, you can pretty much just ignore the scaler here. But this graphics raycaster script, if you want to make your menu interactable with, say, like the UI buttons, you will need this script. So now let's move on to the text. As you can see, it has a pretty small width and height as well. So I'm just going to make it 1000 by 1000 again, and then reset the position. So now it's in the top there. So then also, you can just mess around with these text settings here. Change the font if you want to. I'm going to change the size of this. I like larger fonts. But if you want to go really large, 300 is the maximum, so anything larger just automatically gets down to 300. So for this, let's just make it 150, and I'll center it, and then menu. So that's pretty much all you need to have text in your world. Just mess around with the settings here to achieve what you want it to look like. Now, let's add a button so we can interact with our menu. First, right-click the canvas, go to UI, and add button. It creates the button, which is really small, and it also adds the text underneath it. So I'm just going to go ahead and change the width and height here to say 800 by 200, if I can type that. And then I'm also going to move it up a little bit, so it's just under menu. Next, it says button. I'll keep the text, but I'm also just going to increase the font size so that you can actually see what it says. When you create the button, it also adds this image component with the default UI sprite, which you can see down here, which is this low resolution curved cornered box. You can change this to whatever you want it to be, but you just have to mess around with the settings. There's a lot of settings here with the UI button, but most of it doesn't really matter for what we're doing right now. It's all going to be within this on-click events. The on-click portion here uses the Unity event system, which allows you to take a game object and call a function on it. So if you press the plus sign here and then drag an object in, let's just say grab the button, it'll allow you to call a function on each component or the game object itself. So if I wanted to, let's say you click the button and you then set the game object to inactive. That's just an example, and we're not actually going to do that with this button. So all of these on-click events are local only. If you want them to be global, you will need to link it with a trigger. But for the example, let's just create an object, say a 3D cube, drag that outside, reset the transform, and let's just put it right here. And I'm going to disable it at first inside the button. I'm going to add a Unity event. I'm going to drag the cube, game object, set active, and then check it, meaning I will set it to true. As I mentioned, the Unity event system here is local only. So if you want to make it so that everyone else can see the changes, you will need to link it with a trigger. So the first step to doing that is adding a VRC trigger script. I'm going to add a custom trigger here, and for this example, instead of doing a local cube, I'm going to make a global one. So this is going to be called turn on cube. Let's go ahead and create a new object here, duplicating the local cube, global cube. Just gonna move it over here. Inside button, gonna go back to this trigger script, set game object active. I'm going to drag the global cube in, set it to true. For now, I will just leave it as always buffer 1, but this is up to you on how you want to handle it. With the Unity event system, you can directly call custom triggers, but it takes some setup to do so. Let's add a new event. You drag the button in, go to VRC trigger, and as you can see from this list, it does not actually have execute custom trigger here, but the way we go do that is first click this send message string. So the string field here will be the name of our custom trigger, and so I will copy that in. And then next, we need to actually change the function. The VRC trigger script itself has a function called execute custom trigger, but it is private and not public, and so we need to manually change this. So at the top here, this drop down, go into debug mode, find your button script, go to the on click, and then continually go down until you find the right item here. And so now we can edit exactly what function we're going to call. And so edit this to execute custom trigger. And so this is now done. We can go back to normal mode, and if it worked, it'll say VRC trigger.execute custom trigger. If it didn't work, it'll say something related to like this doesn't exist, which in fact I can just show you that now. Add a value at the end of there, and then it'll say missing. Let's undo that. And it's good. So with this, our button actions are done, but we can't yet click it. So to do that, we'll go back up here to the canvas, and there's two things we need to do. One, we gotta change it off the UI layer. So for UI, this is where your microphone icon shows up, and you can't interact with that. So you can pretty much change this to most other layers. Easy one would be default. And yes, when you change it, you change all the children objects as well. The second thing that you need to do is you need to type in VRC UI shape and click enter. This right here basically makes it so that the UI object can have that little ray cast. So the little laser that shows that you're clicking on something. With these two items here, you can now click your button. Testing it in game here, one thing that you'll notice is that whenever you are looking at this menu, the ray, the thing that indicates that you can interact with it, is always visible. So you can reach your button even from, say, across your map. In order to fix that, what you can do is you can instead change this to UI menu. It doesn't exactly fix it to the sense of you can limit the ray itself, but what will happen is if you change it to UI menu, you will only be able to access or click the button itself when you have your own in-game menu open. Just showing it in game here. As you can see, I can't click the button, but if I move over here and open the menu, I can now click the button. The last thing I want to mention here is that some of these UI options actually have dynamic events. So with the button, it was an on-click, meaning it only did one thing and it was static. But say with like toggle, which is a check mark, depending on if it is checked or unchecked, you can pass that Boolean value along. So toggles can give you Booleans, sliders can give you a float value, and then input fields give you just plain text. Just to show the example here, I'm going to create a toggle, and then it'll have on value changed Boolean. So one thing that you can do with this is on example, function game object, dynamic bool. So depending on what the parameter is, you can pass in that value into it. So if I set active here, depending on if this toggle is checked, it'll set it to true or false. That's all for this tutorial. I'm not going into much detail here as Unity's UI is all documented. The main thing I wanted to show was how to interact with UI in VRChat and activate triggers through them. If you have any questions, you can ask in the comments, or you can ask in the worlds related channels in the official VRChat Discord. Until next time, thanks for watching.